This video is to explain the schools database within the In Loco Parentis software. So on the left-hand side, if I go to the Schools tab, then I see the schools that have been currently selected for this particular company. So at the top, it tells me there are 29 schools selected. And on the right-hand side, you can see some X's, and you can see some schools that don't have X's. The X's are schools that have been added to the list of active schools for this company, but haven't yet been used. So, for example, ACS International School in Cobham has been selected as a school for use with this company, but we have no students at that school. Whereas Akeley Wood here has been selected, and we have 2 students at that school. So we can see the students that we have at that school. To select or deselect, if I wanted to unselect ACS Cobham, then I would click here and it would simply be removed from the list. That's not to say the school has been deleted. The school remains in our database. I think our database has about 600 schools at the moment, but it's removed from the active schools for this company. So rather than trekking through 600 schools, you only need to trek through the schools when you're selecting from a list of schools. You only need to go through the schools that you have currently selected. So if I want to find a new school, so for example, let's just see if this particular company has, they've got, let's see at the bottom. Okay, so Winchester School isn't here. So if I go to the top and I search for Winchester School, Winchester College, yeah, that'll do, Winchester College, then on the right-hand side there is a plus, and if I click on that plus and clear the filter, then you'll see that Winchester College is now one of the schools available to this particular company. And I can remove it quite easily as well. Okay, so that's the list of schools. We highly recommend that you search and use any of the bare bones records that we've provided, these 600 schools that are on here. Some of them are more than bare bones records, some of them are quite well padded out with lots of information, but some of them are bare bones where we've supplied literally the telephone number, the address, and the website. So let's have a look at a school. I'm going to use Rugby School. And here it is. Here's the record. So on the General tab, you've got the basic information about the school. So this is the type of school, whether it's a language school or indeed a university, tutorial college, and so forth. The gender is fairly obvious. There are several genders provided, including the diamond models. Then the status of the school, is it independent, is it an academy, faith, and so forth. Some of these options are for Irish schools as well. And then quite importantly, the type of accommodation that it provides. So for example, this particular school provides full boarding, it provides day schooling, and it provides weekly boarding. That will then make a difference elsewhere in the software to what accommodation, what kind of students you can assign to this particular school. Standard years means that this school provides, we are going to use one of the year naming conventions. The system supports 4 year naming conventions, the English, the Scottish, the Northern Irish, and the Irish year naming conventions. And it will put up standard year names. So if I show you that when we are creating a new school in a moment. If we go back here, if you don't have standard year naming conventions for a school, then it will probably be a university or a tutorial college where it's just done year by year. And in those particular schools or universities, you simply use a numbering system based on the length of the course that the student is doing. So if there is no standard year naming, then the student record will say the length of the course that they're on. So they might be on a 4-year undergraduate course, and then it'll say exactly which year they are in there. So they might be in year 3 or 4. And that will come to when we look at the rollover for schools later for students. Underneath here, you have the if there is boarding, and you will get the boarding information for girls and boys, and depending on what the gender is, you will get either boys or girls information here to type in. So this is the minimum and maximum ages for boys and girls at that school. The address is fairly obvious. Use the Google selector to find the correct location for that address for schools that don't have individual boarding houses. So here, for example, this has not been set up for this particular school. I can set it up. It will give me a general idea of where Rugby School is, and Google has found this school, and indeed that is about the correct place for Rugby School. And so if I save location on top of that, then this will go green and I can update the record, and now it's aware of where Rugby School is. The telephone number, email, and web details would be normally entered by us. That would be the bare bones record. If you click on any of these web links, so for example, if I click here, it will open up a tab in Chrome and take me to Rugby School's homepage. If I want to change any of those, I can do that by simply clicking on the record and typing it in, and then checking that it takes me to the right page. So we store the main website, we store the school policies, we store a link which is very useful that takes you directly to the term dates, which is completed in most cases. In this case, here's the term dates for Rugby School. And we also give you details for the calendar, which is sometimes also useful with the term dates, a campus map if there is one, and the parent portal, and we'll see those coming up later as well. The local authority designated officer and the phone number and email for them you can enter if you have them, and if the school has a designated safeguarding lead that you're aware of, you can enter them. You can only select from staff at the school. Staffing is next, and we provide no information on any of the bare bones records on staff. That is a protected piece of information under GDPR. If you're adding them, then you will have the consent of those staff to keep that record on the school database. We provide no information about staff. In this particular company, there is one member of staff, and we have an amount of data on that staff. So we know their job title, we know the houses of the school, we'll come to in a second, but this particular person is associated with Griffin House and she's the house mistress. If you want to type in multiple information here, then you can put semicolons between their various job titles, and it will show you them as separate job titles. We can also type in here the contact information. We can type in telephone numbers, primary email addresses, and Skype and WeChat information, secondary email addresses, and so forth here. You can actually get school staff to log in. If school staff log in, then they can see all the students at their school, and that might be at more than one agency. You can control the permissions that school staff have in the normal manner of the permissions, and there's a separate permissions video to help you with that. We're now going to look at year names. We had a quick look at this before, but what I'm going to do, rather than do it on this record, I'm going to create a new school, and I'm going to invent a new school. So if I go add a new school, I'm going to call it ABC School. And if I go to year names, if I click on the naming convention and I, for example, click the Irish convention, then it will set these up with the Irish convention. So junior infants, senior infants, so on, first class, then through to sixth class, and then first year through to sixth year. If I know that this school only runs from first year to sixth year, then I can limit the start year and the stop year. So that will be just a secondary school, and save it like that. So the year naming convention is set up for the 4 main standards available. Going back to rugby school now, we'll look at terms. Terms are very important because terms allow the school information to be transferred to the student with regard to travel dates. So terms appear here, and we can look back at the archived records by going Show Archive in the normal manner over here, and this also show previous terms of their records for the term dates. So in term dates, you start a new term, you create a new term by pressing plus. We don't provide any term information, like we don't provide staff information. The reason we don't provide term information is because it's very important, and it's important that you get that right. So you can type in term information. If we were doing Lent 2022 here, we can probably find that information from Rugby School's website. So let's just find their, so we have 2022 dates down here. So if we click on this, Rugby have provided that data. So we're going to try and type in this information and create the 2022 term. Let's just see if that is correct. This is add event. So this is, here we go. It's this one we actually want, the 2021-22 term dates, this one here. So we're going to try and type in Lent 2022, which is this one down here. I'm going to try and get in all this information. Now, Rugby is exceptionally good at providing exact timings on this. Some of this information, such as the staff INSEAD, we don't need. But Rugby gives us very good timings on this, and the software is capable of dealing with that timing. So this term begins, it's called Lent 2022. You should use the same nomenclature, whether it's Easter, Lent, or summer, or Trinity in this particular case, as the school use. And you should always have a year on the school, on the term name. Term begins on Monday the 10th at this time. Now that will mean for Rugby that the teaching actually begins on Tuesday the 11th. So they will have, we could put in, if we had day pupils at Rugby, we could put in 2 starts, one for the Tuesday, which would be when the day pupils have to get there, and one for the Monday, which is when the boarding pupils need to get in. So we're going to put this one in. It's the 10th of January, and they've told us that the people can get there anytime from 6:30 to 9 o'clock. So we're going to go back to our program. We have Lent 2022, and as far as we're aware, that will be for all year groups. You can have separate starts, but this is going to be all years, and I'm going to add on that this is all years boarding. And the start was the 10th of January 2022 at 6:30. So 10th of January 2022 at 6:30, or I could type 18:30, system will. And the latest time that pupils can return is 9 o'clock. So I'm going to copy that and type it here. So 10th of January 22 at 2100 hours. And so that would be the starts. I could put in the second start, which would have been the day school start, but I won't complicate it for now. Term ends on Wednesday the 30th of March at 10:30. So I'm going to put a year group for 30th of March 22 at 10:30, and I'm going to leave the end date. The second one would be when it's possible. It's probably acceptable for Rugby to be picking up students all the way up to, say, midday. But for the purposes of this, I'll just save that. And when I save that, if there isn't a term end end date, a term end pickup time, as it were, it will simply copy the time from the start. So we've got the term starts and we've got the term ends. We now need to put the term breaks in. And the term breaks will be things like half term and so forth. Rugby calls half term, and it calls exeats, exeats. So let's put in a half term begins Friday the 11th of February at 10:30. So this is half term 11th of February at 10:30. And let's just see when it finishes. So half term ends the 20th of February, and again at their standard sort of end of term, and so this will be for boarders coming back on between 6:30 and 9. Okay, so that's half term, and we can save that record as well, and that will put half term in, and it's filled in the rest of the data for us. Okay, but there's more breaks in here, and let's just see what they are. So they have a first exeat, and I'm going to copy that across if I can, see if it does with that. And this is the 21st of January at 10:30. So I'm going to add the first exeat. And the 21st of January at 10:30. 21st of January at 10:30, ending on the 23rd. 23rd of January at 6:30 and 23rd of January at 9 p.m. Okay, and we're also going to add the second exeat, which is the 12th of March. And finishes presumably on the 14th of March. Yep. And finally, we're going to add this information, which is the D-block parents meeting. So that is 21st of January. So they have these parents meetings on the day of the exeat. So this parents meeting will probably start at 9 a.m. So if we go to events now, and we add an event, we can say there is a parents evening. And actually, interestingly, it's already prompted me for that. I don't really want to write the year 11 in there, but maybe I can. And so it's the D-block parents meeting. And again, we can see whether that's useful when we try to assign this to a student. And so this is Friday the 21st of January. We're going to assume it's 9 a.m. Now, interestingly, at the moment, the way this is configured is it is configured, the default date is in this particular format, and the default time is with AM and PM. Some companies might prefer that. Other companies might prefer the day at the front as well, and the timing to be in 24-hour format. So if that is the case, then you can ask us to change your default format. It's not user selectable, but we can change that, and we'll just do that now. So you can see that we've changed the format here, and it also includes the day, which is often quite handy. So we can see that this is actually on Friday, the 21st of January 22, and we've put the day, the time in 24-hour format. Okay, so we've set up a lot of this now. We've set up the exeats, we've set up that parents' evening. I'm not going to set this parents' evening up. We've set up the half term, and we've set up the second exeat. So we have a lot of information about Trinity term, Lent term 2022 now. But what we haven't done is assign that to any students. So if I go back to the students page, I happen to know that David Wong is at Rugby, and if I look at his schools tab, I can see that he is in D block. So if I go to his terms tab, I can see that he hasn't been assigned a term start and a term end for this term. So I'm going to start him on the boarding. If he was a day student, I would assign him to the day start. And you can now see that it's showing the exact timings here, and I'm going to assign him to a term end. I can also expand this record, and I can see the rest of the data here. So I can now assign him to all breaks in the term. So if I click on breaks, I could assign him to half term, the second EXIAT, the first EXIAT, all separately, or I can just go add all, and it will assign him to all those parts, and you can see that it's put them in the correct order here. I can also assign him to events. So if there were multiple parents' evenings here, I could assign him to multiple, to whatever he's coming up, or if there was a school concert that was in the data there, I could assign him to various events. But I'm going to assign him to the D block parents meeting, and so that is going to appear in his schedule as well. So I am going to save this here. I'm going to show you another mechanism of putting that in, because that's relatively painful. But now if I look on the student schedule, so this would be if I was logging in as a student or a homestay or the parent, it starts to build up the student schedule. So I can see exactly what's coming up for this term, and I can also see what's coming up for Lent term. So here's the details that I just typed in. So I can see the start of the Lent term that I just put in. I can see the parents' evening on the 21st of January, and then I can see the start of the first EXIAT. I can see the half term, I can see the second EXIAT, and I can see the end of term, and I can even see his birthday down here. So a lot of information there. And if I looked on his timeline, then I would see a similar thing. I would see it more graphically, but I would see all the information that's set up about various things that are coming up. So I would see his parents' evening. So here's the start of the Lent term. I would see all that information, and I could see exactly what his journeys are. If you want more information on how to use the timeline, there is a separate video for that. But basically, his travel information would show up here as well. So that is a fairly full explanation of the term details. It is awkward if you've typed in the rugby school data. You may have a dozen students at rugby school. You can access them here, so you can see which students are there, and you can assign their terms here and do that quite quickly. But there's another tool in the utilities page, which is to assign school terms to students. And this will very quickly put in the term starts and the term ends where it can. And there's even an auto assign button up here. The only thing this system won't do is it won't put in the events. So if you want to put in events, you have to do those manually first. But on this page, at least it's easy to put them all in at once. I could press auto assign term dates here, and it would simply set all those up, and it's done the whole thing for me. So those ones are done. Going back to schools, so we've seen year names and we've seen terms. We now look at boarding houses. The system is aware of boarding houses in schools like rugby, where the houses are set over quite a large area. It's quite important when you're sending taxi drivers to send them to the correct house, and the system will help them. Taxi drivers can log on and get information about that from here as well. So this school has several houses, and if you go into a house, we store the telephone number and an alternative telephone number. We store an email and an address. And if we just look at the address here, if I click on it, then it will take me and show me, in fact, all the addresses for rugby school. So we can see the main school address here, and we can see the different houses of the school here. So they can be set up. We normally supply a lot of those, and if you have the information, we can help you putting that in. It's quite quick, actually. Staff, you can assign staff. School staff are a separate database, and you can assign staff to a particular house. If you have a member of staff who is already on the teaching staff at rugby and you want to add them to a house, then you can go add existing staff. So that would be putting the staff in here and then adding them to the house. Or if you're wanting to create a new member of staff and assign them to the house, you would press this button here. And as you saw earlier, the staff records have all the information that you need for accessing and communicating with staff. Transport is a set of useful tools. It knows about train stations in the UK, so you can ask it about train stations, and it's familiar with most of the train stations in the UK. And if there is a person at the school who deals with transport from the members of staff, you can select a transport coordinator, which again will give you access to their contact details. You can also say whether there are any preferred taxi companies that you prefer to use or the school prefers you to use associated with that school, and you can have multiple taxi companies here. And if you are assigning students, so if I go to the student record and I went into one of these students and I was looking at their timeline and I was adding a taxi journey, then in the taxi journey that it then gives me, if I clicked on taxi company, it would tell me which are the preferred taxi companies. The preferred taxi companies will appear at the top of the list. So that's the preferred option for taxi companies here. These bits of information this was where the school will provide transport to the local train station. Several schools run their minibuses backwards and forwards to the train stations to help pupils get their trains, and there are various other options here. If a school provides accommodation over half term, so for example provides boarding over a short break, that would be an EXIAT, or a long break, which would be a half term, then that information will be shown when you are looking at their timeline as well. We've already seen this, but you can see the students that you have at Rugby School. So rather than going to the list of students and getting all the students, it will simply show you the students of that particular school. School files private is basically a filing system. So for example here, I can add file information. There are a separate video on files and resources, but I can add filing information that is specific to the school. So I could add a file here. I can select from my operating system a file and I can upload it and give it a name. So this would be the annual report. And I could then share that information as well. So if I wanted to, I could share that information with a parent or a student. If I select that, expand the record and go to sharing rules, then I could share that with parents who have children at Rugby School and so forth. And again, there's a separate video on sharing and files, which helps you to understand how to set all these up. These are reasonably comprehensive. School placement is a very simple tab that simply holds a single piece of information, which is the details about if you are using school placement with a school, then you can say when you met them, when you visited, the agreement information that you have, and you can upload a file, which is the record, the agreement file. And in fact, you can upload multiple files. So if, as the agreements expire, next year you can add the subsequent agreement record here. And finally, notes here, school notes. You can set whichever kind of notes you want here. So you could set notes on Ofsted reports, you could have general information, and this is just information that you store. A file note has a date, it has a summary, and then information that you type in, plus again its own separate filing system. So this would be quite useful if you went on open days or you went on and you gathered information. You could store that information here, and that would be a record for you. The settings for that, about exactly which notes tabs appear, are in preferences, and then in note tabs there is a section called schools. So if I set up COVID rules or something for the school, and I wanted to keep it up to date with all the latest information they've sent me on coronavirus, then if I go back to schools, there is now a tab called COVID rules, and I could store the information about COVID rules in that tab. So that's the notes, and that's it for schools. There is one more utility that I will show you, which is the student rollover. Because the system understands year names and because the system understands pupils, you can actually, at the end of the academic year, you can set up the rollover. So David Lee, who is currently in year 9, can be set to roll over to year 10. David Wong, who is currently in D block, which is year 11, will roll over to the LXX, which is year 12, and so forth. And this copes with university students as well. So if they're on a 4-year course in year 3, then they'll be on year 4. If they're on year 4 of year 4, then they will be finished, and it will show that as a finished option here as well. And there are various options here, ignoring students with future guardianship dates. So if you set up your students correctly for September, you don't want them having to be part of the rollover. And the same again with school start dates. And you can either do universities separately or together, and it'll do the whole thing. So if I press this rollover, it would roll over all these students to the next year group. And that's the end of this video. If you have any questions, please message us as usual.